there's a little piece of it, and still others have never visited and have come today to hear the story. So thank you everyone for being here. And there's so much to tell, so I'm gonna go really fast so we can fit it all in. Hop on the Nature Trail is the title of my presentation today. And here you see our brand new logo for the Friends School Nature Trail. So this is kind of several stories all weaving together of how the gardens began and how they became the Nature Trail. Whoops, now let's see, how can I make it go forward? Hold on. Okay, for me, this is where all of my work begins, literally and conceptually. Not much has changed about me from this photo in my grandparents' garden in Greenville, Delaware, and our garden in Baltimore 60 years later. As Popeye says, I am what I am. I'm always happiest outside among plants. My clothes are usually wrinkled, messy, and shirt half tucked in. My knees are dirty. I love red and chartreuse, and I always wear a watch. And in gardens, I look up more than I look down. My family moved from Greenville, Delaware to a farm in Westchester, Pennsylvania when I was 5 in the heart of the Brandywine Valley. There were 4 children in my family when we moved there. And by 1970, there were 6 of us. Our farm has a big hill, and from the top, there are views far and wide. I attended Unionville Elementary School from 1st to 3rd grade. And Unionville is a great school, but it wasn't a great school for me. When I drive by on my visits to my family farm, now I understand why. The school still has the same landscape of conformity, a big brick building on a flat lawn with play areas surrounded by chain link fence. Fortunately, my parents realized how unhappy I was, and they transferred me to Westtown Friends School when I was in 4th grade. I couldn't believe that it was school. We were outside all the time, collecting leaves, acorns, twigs to use in art projects, identifying wildflowers on the wildflower trail, sketching the dogwoods using pastels, identifying all grasses and weeds within a square yard while lying on our bellies in the arboretum. It was a 600-acre campus and a 14-acre lake. It's also where I was first introduced to Quakerism. And for me, its tenets are completely intertwined with people of all ages, paying attention to nature with a child's sense of wonder, a concept Rachel Carson describes in her book by that name. With such a big family, my parents had to move us from Westtown, where boarding was required in upper school. So I attended 8th through 12th grades back in Greenville, Delaware at Tatnall School. My favorite subjects there were the ones I loved most at Westtown: math, art, and especially painting and Latin. On to Princeton, where I majored in English while wandering a campus shaped by landscape architect Beatrix Ferrand's vision. Then we moved to Nashville, where my husband Bill attended Vanderbilt Medical School while he was a resident at Strong Memorial Hospital in Rochester, New York. I began a master's degree in English from University of Rochester, which I completed from South Dartmouth, Massachusetts, where we settled after residency. In retrospect, all of my academic writing focused on human relationships with nature. I've always been especially interested in children's literature. Our first son, William, class of '02, was born in Rochester. Second son, Thomas, class of '05, in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Then we moved to Baltimore in 1991, and our daughter, Katie, was born there in 1992. And I see all 3 of them here. Hi, everyone. As an adult, I have gardened in steamy Nashville, chilly Rochester, windy Buzzards Bay, and finally I'm settling back into the same mid-Atlantic conditions in which I grew up. I was a stay-at-home and garden mom. All of our children attended Friends School of Baltimore starting in 1991 when we moved to Baltimore. And Katie, our youngest, graduated in 2010. I am still going to Friends School of Baltimore. Gardening is always a part of my life, every single day. And people identified me as the gardener long before I thought of myself that way. And I was surprised to be called that. In 1998, when Katie was about the same age I am in the photo at the beginning, my next door neighbor, Jane Lawrence, figured out that I was a gardener in need of a garden club and invited me to join Guilford Garden Club. In 1998, I joined, and my native plant mentor and landscape designer, Ann Lundy, was president. She scooped me right up into community projects and plant sales, which all had to do with native plants, a concept I knew nothing about. We worked on the caretaker's cottage at what is now Lake Roland and a native plant garden at Musong Academy. Both projects had great beginnings and tough endings. The first was completely torn down with the building, the second mowed down by Baltimore City. In 2003, at the encouragement of Ann Lundy, I started gardening professionally. I attended every conference I could find on horticulture and design. At this time, designing with native plants was a relatively new idea, and the information was difficult to find. So the purpose of the Guilford Garden Club to stimulate the knowledge and love of gardening, to aid in the protection of native plants and birds, to encourage civic planting, and to promote conservation of the environment. This purpose was written in the 1920s, and it's really wonderful to think that we're still in line with those ideas. One of the concepts I learned about at all the conferences was disturbance events and succession. Disturbance events are things like storms, fires, floods, insects, human activity, pandemics. Succession is what happens next, and that's what interests me. It's when processes are set in motion by the change in conditions. In 2005, when Thomas graduated and Katie became the third child in our family to use this textbook as she started 8th grade, I always loved seeing it going in and out of our children's backpacks because its cover reminded me of my Westtown days. By the third time it was in action in our family, its title had become a mantra for me. And here's where we were. The disturbance event was the construction of this amazing building. The building and surrounding changes to the landscape demonstrated Friends School of Baltimore's commitment to conservation. It was equipped with many environmentally sensitive features, recycled materials, lots of natural light, water conservation, and all the plumbing fixtures, geothermal heat and cooling with wells located under the upper school parking lot, and an athletic field with a drainage system to manage stormwater. These are the Friends School of Baltimore conservation initiatives, or some of them, in 2005. And the one that really got our whole initiative into action was the Forest Conservation Plan that called for over 50 trees. So 3 trees were planted in the area that's missing from this photo. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but between this electric box and the fire hydrant. And those trees really caught my attention. There were some growing pains that came with the move from the old middle school to the new middle school. And Katie expressed a kind of a sense of confused adjustment with the move from the familiar cozy cramped rabbit's warren like quarters into the big bright new space. And a bigger feeling of discomfort came on campus when someone defaced the peace pole. Peace pole is it's a pole that has I think 5 or 6 sides on which let's see, something about peace for all nations is written in several different languages on this peace pole, and it stands in the traffic circle in the driveway between upper campus and pre-primary. In the middle of all this, when I saw the trees that had been planted on the south face of the middle school, I noticed that they were all beautiful native tree specimens: Cornus florida, which is dogwood; Magnolia grandiflora, which is southern magnolia; Ilex opaca, which is American holly. They were all understory trees, and they were planted in full sun and high wind. The trees looked uncomfortable too. I recognized an interesting opportunity, and I went to the Guilford Garden Club board and membership, then led by Elizabeth Hanson, and also to the Friends School of Baltimore administration to ask if Guilford Garden Club, a team, could review the planting plans and possibly work with the school on the planting. Whoops, I'm going backwards, sorry. So Guilford Garden Club was timid about a new community project after seeing our others disappear. With this project, we were eager to begin with a strong relationship with school leadership. Our initial meetings with these 4 key people, plus heads of all divisions and divisional science chairs, gave us a chance to come up with guiding principles that were aligned to the purposes of both Friends School of Baltimore and Guilford Garden Club. Matt Michike was in his first year as head of school, and I am eternally grateful to him for taking a chance and giving us this opportunity. We held a meeting with Matt and the science teachers from all the departments, Bonnie Hearn and Frank Carberry, and we figured out that our first planting would be on Earth Day on the east face of the middle school and at the Peace Pole. We also modified the tree selections that were to be planted by the contractor. 2 of the original trees were relocated to better sites, and sadly, the dogwood died. Additions to the tree canopy are always a high priority with every planting opportunity. Ann Lundy had a big impact on the genesis of the project, very pure and simple guiding principles that were in keeping with Guilford Garden Club's purpose. A plant palette native to Maryland's Chesapeake Bay watershed, Piedmont, habitat for birds and pollinators, and conservation. It helped us keep focused and also helps diffuse requests for everybody's favorite plant that may or may not fit into the gardens. And it's a discipline that makes just a lot of sense. We had a project workbook. As I said earlier, there were not a lot of materials available about native plants at the time, but this book had just been published in 2003, and we used it as our workbook. It's a really wonderful manual, and it's available online. It describes things in different conditions, so woodland, dry, sunny slopes, or hillsides, wetlands, and wet meadows. And in 2005, other good resources were field guides and Brown and Brown, which is a wonderful compilation of native plants of Maryland. Native plants were limited in nurseries, and many were only available as cultivars, not the straight species. So we made a rule that we would try to purchase all the plants from growers within 100 miles of campus, and we're lucky to have major growers in that radius. The first planting was the Redbud Alley on the east side of the middle school. And there's a drawing that was done by one of our landscape designers within the garden club, Robin Shackett. And sadly, her participation was very limited in this effort because she moved almost immediately after we started the project, but we were lucky to have her help us get started. Here's the first planting, all laid out. It was on Earth Day, and you can see Scott Harrington, who was then head of middle school, in the middle of it. Dave McGibney, the lower school science teacher, one of the heroes of our project, was in charge of Earth Day for at least 10 years, and he secured a grant for this at the Chesapeake Bay Trust. He worked behind the scenes on every aspect and phase of the gardens and helped with logistics and communications, as well as with the shovel. It's hard to find a photo of him in action because he moves so fast from one project to another. When we laid this all out, Scott Harrington looked at me and said, "What happens if we don't finish?" And I said, "We are going to finish," and we did. Jean Malott is a member of Guilford Garden Club, and at the time she was a Morgan State landscape architecture student. She has had valuable input on many of our designs. She's also both a Friends School teacher and a parent of 2 Friends School sons who graduates. And here she is helping her young planter with Rubus odoratus, which is flowering raspberry. This plant will come up again in the talk. There's Elizabeth Hansen working with these 2 young ladies, teaching them how deep to dig a hole and how to take a plant out of a pot. And here's Bobby Hansen, her mother-in-law, who is president of the entire National Garden Club of America. We feel really lucky to have had her hands touch the soil in this project. And I was working right next to her, listening to her chatter with a student who was finding one exciting discovery after another. Whoops. Here I am. I know exactly what I'm saying. I'm talking about planting depth, the magic of the root crown and the importance of setting it at the right ground level or slightly above and not covering that point of the plant with soil or mulch. I always think and tell my helpers, imagine you are a seed and you fell on top of the soil. You would grow roots into the soil and send leaves up for sunlight. Meanwhile, over at the Peace Pole, we have a really great activity going on, and a young lady showing a lot of attitude. I had all of these plants that we needed to arrange. They were all set out around the outside. So this is a 4th grade class, and I had them all hold a plant and put it on top of their heads. You can see this group still have their plants on top of their heads. The first group took 1 step in, the second 2, the third group 3, and the fourth 4 steps. And then everyone put their plants down on the ground. And a year later, this is what we had. Robin Shackett moved away to Cleveland, and Ann Lundy said she wouldn't draw, so yikes, it's my job. This was my sketch for the front of the middle school. Luckily for all of us, while we were laying the plants out for planting, we were approached by Elizabeth Reed, another Friends School parent whose daughters were new to Friends. She saw all of our plants and she said, "Who are you and how can I get to be a part of you?" Elizabeth was a University of Pennsylvania landscape architecture graduate. She studied in the 1980s under Ian McHarg, the pioneer of ecological landscape design and author of Design with Nature. She is a mother of Margaret, class of 2010, and Olivia, class of 2012. Elizabeth's input took our project to an entirely new level with better concept development for each separate garden and integration of the entirety. Here we are planting. These photos show one of my favorite aspects of Friends School of Baltimore, cross-divisional partnerships. Friends School of Baltimore is a school where a student could potentially be on campus from infancy through 12th grade. Little Friends begins at 2 months. I love seeing older students working with younger ones and listening to them field the inevitable existential questions that come with the territory. As designers, we take it very seriously that this is a landscape which needs to be visually rich and alive, a place you would want to spend all of your childhood days. It's also fun to see the students learn just how challenging gardening really is and the physics required to use tools. These are 2 Guilford Garden Club members who are also parents of, each of them, 2 sons, Kimberly Warren and Helen Couch. 2 years later, this is what the front of the middle school looked like. 3 years later, you see this tree is bald cypress or Taxodium distichum. And that tree actually fit in my minivan when it was planted. So that's how much it had grown in 3 years. You can see that there's a Asclepias tuberosa or milkweed. It's a host plant for the monarch butterfly. So Andrew Spahn was doing a monarch tagging project. There's asters and vegetables and marigolds in this space. It's very lively. There's the fruit of the Taxodium. It's beautiful. And there, that 8 years later, look at how tall that tree has become. And this plant in the front of this photo is Aster ericoides. We didn't plant this. It came in by seed and then the seed spread. Many of you know the work of Doug Tallamy and his book, Bringing Nature Home. Through a series of happy coincidences, we were lucky to have a visit from him in 2011. Ann Lundy knew him through her work with Irvine Nature Center's Native Plant Seminar, and he and Friends School parent McKay Jenkins are both professors at University of Delaware. So when Doug came and he saw this sweep of aster that we didn't plant, he was thrilled because he realized its ecological effectiveness. And here is what happens in that aster when it's blooming. I'm hoping that you're getting to see all of these insects, bees of all types, all over the plants, and they're right next to the students. Everyone's happy. For many years, I worked with Guilford Garden Club volunteers in the gardens every Monday in the late afternoon. One day, when I was working near the Rubus odoratus that I pointed out earlier, the night watchman stopped on his golf cart and asked, "In the middle of the night, when I'm making my rounds, I hear an insect singing in this plant that I've never heard before. Do you know what it is?" I didn't know, and I still don't. And even though I have looked in both the plant and written resources, I haven't found out. It doesn't matter if I know, the insect knows, and the plant knows. And the garden is making the job of a person who stays up all night driving around on a golf cart, taking care of the campus more beautiful and interesting. Here's the way these first plantings are depicted in our nature trail. Within 2 years, we realized we needed to adjust our guiding principles for 2 reasons. The plant selection, the plants at the edges of the walkway were suffering from the heat of the pavers in the summer and the de-icing in the winter. And so we decided to add coastal plain plants for that were more tolerant of these conditions. And then we also found an engineering opportunity to solve problems of surface water runoff. Here's a slide that shows the importance of the campus location in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So you have Friends School at this star, which is on Stony Run, which runs into the Jones Falls, which runs into the Patapsco River, which runs into the Chesapeake Bay. Jean Malott was focusing on stormwater in her landscape architecture degree work at Morgan State, and she made this map for our documents. And this is a topographical map from the city of Baltimore. Each orange line represents a 2-foot drop in elevation. There's a 90-foot drop from Charles Street to Stony Run. The shaded area right here in the middle is the lawn in front of the middle school, and it's sloped toward the parking lot with 3 tiny drains in front of the sidewalk. We had several rainy, icy years in a row, and the parking lot became a treacherous skating rink, and school had to be closed for the safety of all. Anne Lundy had the idea of creating a swale garden to catch the water at a lower level than the drains. I was still doing the drawing, but Elizabeth Reed by now is coaching me, and I learned how to do a cross section. So there is the cross section, there's the drains sticking up, here is the row of drains, and here is our idea for planting. Here's my planting plan under her tutelage, and it's looking a lot more official. I was learning the conventions. 1 year later, the flooding problem never happened again. Frank became a believer. And at this point, the gardens became an integral part of the campus stormwater management efforts. This is in 2013. Another plant that Doug Tallamy noticed on his visit was this black willow, which was also a plant that we didn't plant. So it must have been planted by a bird that was sitting in the little taxodium that we planted right here. Black willow is one of the highest wildlife trees that grows, I think second only to oaks. So Doug was really excited that we had it in our gardens. And when I confessed that we didn't plant it, he said, even better. This is a very important space for the campus. As you can see, this is where graduation is held. And in, I forget what year, I guess 2017, we expanded the swale to completely envelop the area and separate it from the basketball/parking area. There's that willow in 2019. And this picture is also helpful for realizing that snow removal is is something that we always consider. So we leave margins at the edges of all the beds so that the snow can be piled onto that section of lawn and not into where it can hurt the plants. And that's that swale 2 years later. This is the way the swales are depicted in our nature trail map. In 2008, the class chose for its class gift to refurbish the upper school staircase. Elizabeth Reed and I were included in discussions with the class and the school's architect to develop a garden concept along with the hardscape. Okay, here's the area right here. I hope that some of you can remember what it was like before. I only have this very blurry photo that reminds us that there was a narrow set of bluestone steps, lots of invasive plants, slope with trails that the students who didn't want to go down the steps made because it was too narrow, and a drain down at the bottom where it's mucky and wet and with lush grass growing there. Here's the beginning of our concept, thinking about the way people move and what's important and where you're going and what we want, just very, very loose conceptual ideas. And here it's getting a little bit more complex. And I'll read you our concept was a link between high woodland and low meadow to wetlands, upper and lower on campus, and the single narrow opening between the buildings that divide the two. The staircase garden is literally and symbolically a series of rapids and drops for the flow of people and water. The suggested widening of the paths and the sitting walls at the garden's edges relieves traffic by providing eddies, areas to step aside, gather, pause, rest, reflect. Boulders function as a boundary between plants and people, and also slow and direct water flow to plant roots. Their weight and mass visually balance the stone and the architectural elements, and they serve as a reminder of the strength of stone and its raw state in nature. Native plantings welcome pollinators to the garden, and the entire space functions as a woodland edge, a place of high activity with safe perches, simultaneously social and intimate. There's our staircase. Okay, now we're getting into Elizabeth Reed drawing, and this is our boulder layout. And there's all the initials are for the different trees and shrubs we hope to put in, and some of the grasses. There are the boulders. The stope had been stabilized with the planting of winter rye, and the boulders were placed by Glenn Gutierrez of European Landscapes and Design. This garden was the beginning of a wonderful collaboration with Glenn and his team. Here's a more developed drawing by Elizabeth. And here we are planting. Kingsley Moore, one of our, let's see, affiliate members. And there we are, there's the architect. He's inspecting our work, I think. And there's Ann Lundy, imparting her wisdom. Notice the tent in the background. At this time, the new dining hall was under construction, and that's a food tent. There, we added the perennials at an Earth Day planting in April. And here it is filling in. Students the next fall. It's pretty lively, just as we hoped. Lots of color. This is Aster Nova Anglia seed heads and Aster laevis bluebird, two different asters that bloom at different times. Panicum virgatum shenandoah and Itea virginica merlot. We think a lot about scarlet and gray when we're selecting plants. And there it is in our tree lab. Garden care is a really important part of the gardens. We have a challenge with this new type of gardening to make it legible. This is a photo of Penstemon digitalis Husker Red that's gone to seed and created a dense ground cover. The first response of people was, oh my goodness, we need to divide that plant. And the answer to that is no, don't touch it. Don't create any more disturbance. What we're trying to do is have plants expand and go to seed and leave no space at all for weeds. We work with the students on Earth Day for many years. We've been unable to do that during COVID, but we cut back the spent growth in the early spring so that all the insect larvae that are living inside can stay on campus. And we put all of that, all the stems in the woods. We've been through 4 different landscape contractors, and we're trying to find someone who could manage with a light touch and preserve the habitat for as long as possible. This is our garden care plan. Very, very minimalist. There's seed heads of that same plant, the Husker Red. They're beautiful. I mean, why would we want to cut those down? We have over 10,000 plants that have been planted with students. And this doesn't include those planted by contractors or Mother Nature. All of these different species of perennials, ferns, grasses, vines, shrubs, and trees. We need a garden care professional who can identify and understand the growth cycle of all of these. We are really, really lucky to have Gary Walton of Digging in the Dirt working in all of the native gardens now. Before Gary started his garden care business, he was a teacher. So he's a great match for our campus garden and seeing ways it can be used in education. And he's a fantastic photographer. So we are doubly lucky to have him contributing not just to the health of the gardens, but also to our story. These are Gary's. He sees all the caterpillars. In 2009, we had some really interesting developments, the community garden with Stony Run and the pre-primary labyrinth. The pre-primary students did this all by themselves. It was a change in the idea of scale. They used the whole space. A mother of one of the children who worked on this told me her daughter was over the moon happy with what they did. And there we are. There's Elizabeth drawing our work with the Stony Run on the community gardens. And the construction, we worked with students to come up with ideas, and this was really the idea of one student. His idea was this one big long path all the way around. And the only thing that we did to change his design was make the section, the path sections in between. There it is. It is vibrant and active and alive. And there are students around the edges. At some point, it's starting to have some wear and tear, and hopefully we'll be able to refurbish this into some sort of more permanent construction. But one of the things I love the most of it is the made by hand quality. So I hope we can find a balance of more permanence, but still having that made by hand look. There it is. Now we can talk about the picnic blade, another class gift. There was a huge disturbance event, the new dining hall. The challenge for us in designing this space is that all utilities, including the geothermal lines for the middle school, run through the space. Here is our design, and we worked on it, and European Landscapes and Design did the work for us. So they updated our Elizabeth's drawing into this beautiful document. And right here is where the geothermal lines were on the engineer plan. So we sort of designed everything around this with this footprint that emerged. We used tables and tables that were there before. That was the class gift of 2005, Thomas's class. But they were saved and we used them. Right in the middle of the construction, which was big, and here are the boulders that are going to be placed, it was discovered that the geothermal lines were over here. So European Landscapes and Design did a quick improvisation that I think made the design better than it was originally. There's a small footprint up here and the big footprint. We still, we sort of stuck with the footprint, but here are the stones. You can tell the scale of them by the parking space size. And there it is, halfway done. While all this construction was going on, we were busy making our plant list that came from a chapter of this book, which was published in the 1920s. And it has a chapter called the Juniper Hillside. And that is the plant list that we used for this garden. Here it's completed and we have our plantings laid out. And here it is in subsequent years. This is a little piece of the plant community that I took a series of photographs in different seasons. You can see the way, or actually just different months. There it is. Now this is the Forbush Memorial Garden that was in need of refreshing. Frank wanted to shift to our native plants from the existing non-native shrubs, liriope and invasive bamboo. So the conditions are mesic to wet woodland. And we began to experiment with more species of carex, which is a cool season grass. And cool season grasses have two big growth times: in the early spring, when most of them flower and set seed, and in the fall. And many of them are semi-evergreen. They're very, very useful. So this garden developed really beautifully. It's an area that we've called the hollows, the shady lowlands, the spaces in between. Now, this is a huge project, the Little Friends swale. Frank now knew that we could control flooding, and his basement was flooding after the construction of the Little Friends. You can see that here's Frank's house. Here's the Little Friends, the building that was purchased for Little Friends. Here, this is a big pink stucco building that was purchased and removed. We created a plan for the upper section of the space and marked it out for the contractor to dig. Our design showed a swale with a flat basin so that the water would be spread across as large an area as possible, but we had trouble articulating this with to the contractor, and it was dug at a slope with a berm across the back. You can see there's Katie standing there for scale. It's a big garden. Another storm came the next day, and we could see that the swale was not going to function correctly. All the water was trapped right here. Bonnie Hearn and I consulted with Friends School's civil engineer, Fred Thompson. He confirmed that our flattening the basin would help accomplish our goal, but encouraged us to make it bigger to spread out the water even further. How much bigger, I asked. As big as we can make it, he said. Suddenly, our garden was 3 times the original size, and in order to clarify the design for our contractor, we made another drawing plus a clay model. And here's the clay model, and the toothpicks all represent trees. We drew it out with yellow lines at the outside, and inside of the blue is where the flat basin is supposed to be. The garden is a series of descending pools. Here it is being dug. The contractor was so excited about the clay model, he took one look at it and said, "Oh, I can do that." So sometimes you just have to go to a different way of representing what you want to accomplish. It was a very, very rainy summer, and we had plenty of opportunities to weather test the garden before planting. Look at all that water. We kept the straw bales there for a long time to slow down the intake of water while the plants were getting established. But they established really quickly. This is, I think, the 2nd year. I mean, the very next year. In July of 2016, we got a really crazy opportunity to be filmed by a woman named Catherine Zimmerman, who was doing a documentary narrated by Doug Townley. And there she is filming. We were joined by representatives from Blue Water Baltimore. That's Vince Vizacaro, who was managing their nursery at the time. And there we all are together. Felicity, I see you there. This little girl was so funny. She came and plopped down in my lap and just was extremely engaged in everything that was going on. There's Felicity working with her children. And remember that Peace Pole girl with the attitude? This is her little sister. So that's how fast these children grow up. And she's a camp counselor in this photo. After after all the plants are in, Guilford Garden Clubs go around and check every single one to make sure their roots are in the ground. This time it was over 500 plants. And I was there by myself at the end of the day. And the little girl who came and sat down in my lap dragged her mother out. She didn't know I was there. And she said to her mother, "Mom, we had a real party here today." So that was music to my ears. And there's the Woodland Edge at Little Friends. This is another rain garden that we did the next year at Stony Run Meeting. And it has a fun boulder path going through the center of it. And there are 10th grade science class students working in the garden. There's lots of uses of the gardens in the curriculum. Little Friends in pre-primary and lower school, the science teacher, Dave McGivney, also art, writing, landforms, and the community garden. In middle school, science teacher Andrew Spahn and art teacher Evan Gifford. I think he might have retired though, but they were using the gardens all the time. And in upper school, the gardens are used in art, science, and English. And then there's always osmosis, just being in the gardens. Here's our first signage on campus. It was required by the Chesapeake Bay Trust, who funded the Stony Run Garden. And Elizabeth, instead of making a sign that has all the different plants identified one at a time, we wanted to have a sign that would tell the story of what was happening. And so you see her beautiful drawing showing the basins where the water is collecting and how conservation landscaping works. There's the meeting and the boulders going through the garden behind it. When the new auditorium was completed, Guilford Garden Club saw another opportunity for community outreach and education. We held 2 free lectures, one in late fall and one in early spring. The lectures were sponsored by European Landscapes, Digging in the Dirt, arborist George Mozell of Stansbury Tree, and all of the wonderful nurseries who grow our plants, plus Blue Water Baltimore. Our 2 lecturers were Doug Tallamy and Rick Dark. I met Doug when he came to Baltimore at the invitation of McKay Jenkins. But then since then, he and I have become friends, and he is an entomologist. His big concept is the Homegrown National Park, an aspirational project to shift 50% of America's lawn to an ecologically planted network of habitat. Contiguous is ideal, but moths and birds can fly, so fragments of habitat can reduce the distance they have to go for food. The initial goal is 20 million acres, and the size, which is the size of 10 Yellowstone parks. That's only 50% of the lawns in this country. Remember I said that I started attending every conference that I could about native plants? I met Rick Dark in 2003 at Winterthur in Greenville, Delaware, at a conference and field workshop where he presented his book, The American Woodland Garden, Capturing the Spirit of the Deciduous Forest. Rick's work spans botany, plants, and cultural landscapes. A self-described landscape ethicist, Rick has contributed to the world's understanding of nature through contributions at Longwood Gardens, Falling Water, the High Line, Carey Furnace in Pittsburgh, private land in Kentucky, Texas, and countless lectures. And I consider Rick a philosopher. In addition to the lectures Rick and Doug presented at Friends, they have both generously answered questions and given wise guidance through the years. They're the books that, or some of the books that they've written, and they're in my library. And here are also resources that are in our documents, and you can see all of these little red stars. These are all the authors that have actually visited our gardens and given advice. These are my faculty. Okay, we like to have areas selected and designs on the drawing board. We've had another big disturbance event. The oaks on campus have been dying and have to be taken down. So this is the playground. How many of you remember playing at the base of the twin trees? I spent a lot of days, rainy days, visiting gardens and photographing the way surface water travels. It's wonderful and valuable that Friends School students have such a beautiful playground, but think how compacted the soil is from all of those little feet running around for years and years and years. The sad truth of the situation is that the oak trees in the playground, integral to the iconic view of the school from Charles Street, an essential habitat for over 550 species of caterpillars, are dying. Frank asked us to consider ways to manage the surface water that was running toward the buildings, but the health of the oak was every bit as much of a concern. We started looking at and photographing healthy woodlands to understand what happens during rainstorms, and what we saw were fallen trees. We developed a concept that would use the trees that had to be taken down on campus to create a combination of play areas and planted areas that would capture and slow surface water and restore soil health for a new generation of oaks that could grow up within their plant communities. This concept was on the drawing board for many years. Because the project spanned both Friends School and Stony Run meeting property, we went through the Quaker process with the meeting for business approval. We applied for and were turned down for 2 grants, even though the grantor organization solicited our applications. The term, quote, too innovative, came back to us as a reason we didn't receive 1 grant. The opportunity to begin the project came right after our flash planting at Little Friends. The white oak towering above that garden died and had to be taken down. I'm deeply grateful to Friends that they decided to take a chance on our too innovative idea and put it into action. Instead of taking the trunk and branching away to be cut up and ground into wood chips, it was moved to the playground. And there it is. Glenn Gutierrez and his team cut the wood into pieces and carefully arranged them on the slope to capture storm water. Garden beds were created around the logs closest to the Stony Run meeting. And we planted one day after school. We were joined by many students from Extended Day and even their parents and grandparents. In 2021, 8 more oaks were taken down and the beds and play log area and added to the beds and play log areas. What was once almost a full shade condition has become almost full sun. A few mature trees remain, and then twin trees are gone. I worked with 10th grade science classes to plant the first of the new beds in November. I had a big bucket of acorns from a white oak tree in Roland Park that we spread over the ground in hopes that some would germinate. Gary fenced the area a few weeks later and noticed that deer had been feasting upon them. Our fingers are crossed that we have at least 1 survivor. Of course, we can add a sapling, but what fun to watch a tree grow from infancy right on campus. I'm so excited to plant the rest of the beds. It's great to be emerging from the suspended animation of COVID. The decaying wood of the trees is full of life. What do you see? Science or art? Or both? Woodland play and exploration. Currently on the drawing board, the west face of the upper school, opposite our very first planting. These views are from south to north and north to south. And the east face of the upper school. Right here and right now, I want to express thanks to the class of 1969 for their 50th reunion gift on garden interpretation, concept, design, develop, fabrication, and installation. We get to tell the story. Disturbance events are not always caused by storms or building construction. Changes in leadership are also disturbance events. Anne Lundy passed away in September of 2014. She had a hand in the design of all the gardens on this map, which was created by her daughter for her memorial service and updated in 2018 for a master gardener Baywise garden tour. This disturbance event brought into sharp focus the need to be prepared for key leaders moving on. Happily, a new set of garden heroes were up and coming on campus, and it's our important job to keep the story and the gardens alive together. It became clear that we needed a better and more thorough expression of the Native Plant Teaching Garden initiative. The audience we wanted to reach is here. We held 2 retreat days. The first with Jenna Webster of Larry Weiner Landscape Design in collaboration with Carol Franklin, one of Elizabeth Reed's professor at University of Pennsylvania and emeritus principal of the landscape architecture firm Andrew Pogon. The second was with Larry Weiner and Jenna Webster and Friends School of Baltimore administration, faculty, Guilford Garden Club members, students, especially a web design class, which is very interested. Glenn Gutierrez and Gary Walton also attended. These meetings took place right before Frank Carberry retired. In addition to some of the people who had been at our very first meeting, there were lots of wonderful new faces at the table, including Joshua Ratner and Catherine Jenkins, upper school English and science teachers. Computer science students came. We discussed the incremental way both the gardens and the information about the gardens have developed, including plant lists and writing on the sustainability webpage. Frank has retired and our new facilities director, Carl Grant, has embraced the project. Because of the class of 69 gift, the alumni and development offices have become more engaged. Our group of garden heroes is growing. We came up with a list of target audiences and ideas for a combination of signage, printed materials, and a web presence. Jenna Webster, who holds master's degrees in education and landscape design, was well suited to guide us through a process of discovery. She created this series of maps for us to think about a way to present the entirety. First, we examined the basic areas of campus and location of gardens and the movement of water through campus. Then she added a layer showing major play and event spaces in purple. Finally, she added all the ways people move through campus. Maybe what we are looking at is a trail. Jenna got to work on this concept with landscape designer and graphic artist Robin Matz, and we went through a series of drafts and revisions. And here it is, all the pieces put together. The buildings are diminished in size, identifiable by iconic windows, doors, and roof lines. Outdoor areas are amplified. There's no beginning or end. It's dreamy. The trail is a state of mind as much as the physical map. The landform and plant communities are named instead of the gardens. We hope the animal icons will one day be permanent sculptures. Think Make Way for Dumplings, or maybe something like this box by a wonderful artist in Pennsylvania. This is from my sister's garden. Right now, an upper school art student is working on a temporary set of sculptures. 5 maps have been installed on campus. We can't wait to get our hats and t-shirts. And how can we encourage continued engagement? Maybe with a series of timeless nature trail queries. A water query. If I were a drop of water, where would I flow from here? Habitat queries. If I were a bird or insect, what could I find to eat here? Where could I nest? Where could I hide? Where could I grow? Plant queries. If I were a wind-borne seed, where would the wind blow me from here? When I grow, what would my roots touch underground? What time would my leaves catch the sun? What other plants are growing in my plant community? How will I be pollinated? How will my seeds spread? Child in the garden queries. If I'm very quiet, what will I see and hear here? If I feel playful, what would I play? I'm curious. What can I learn here? And that's it. Okay, I'm going to stop my share.
Thank you, Kay. Any questions for Kay or comments? Go ahead and raise your hand or chat it to us.
I know I took a long time, I'm sorry. Oh, Elizabeth.
Okay, there was some damage that happened on that pathway that goes to the upper school to the left side of the stairway where they had to remove and fix some gas lines. So were the plants restored after that, you know, that infrastructure work had to happen?
That's a great question because we weren't really sure how we were going to fix that. So there were some shrubs that had to be removed and they were lost, and we bought new shrubs to replace them. And then we bought a few grasses, but no perennials. And the amazing thing is that there was so much seed in the seed bank that we didn't even have to buy any perennials. They all just came up on the other side. So yes, we replaced a few, but not very many.
Thank you.
Hi, Kay. I love that presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was curious, has anyone conducted a formal pollinator survey for the campus? It sounds like Gary, I think you mentioned, has taken a lot of photographs of things, which is awesome. But
no,
okay.
As far as I know, there's no formal survey. Upper school students in advanced biology always did an insect collection as part of their work, but and there was a teacher, George Wright, who was there for quite a few years, and both of my sons had him, and he had a lot of data. And also there's a lot of bird data, because there have been so many of the faculty are really avid birders. So that's another great source of information, but I don't know about anything formal, and that would be a really interesting thing.
Yeah, well, the reason I'm curious is just because the awesome diversity of native plants you guys have put on campus. I would not be surprised if it might be a local hotspot for biodiversity of bees, other kinds of pollinators, and maybe the whole Baltimore area. I mean, it'd be awesome to check that out and see how much diversity it actually fosters.
So that's a great idea.
Yeah.
How can we make this happen?
Yeah, well, I'd be happy to pitch in if I was able to. So.
Anybody else? Elizabeth, were you raising your hand? You were waving. Do you have something to say?
Elizabeth, you just have to unmute.
You can you unmute?
Okay, yes, that's what I couldn't figure out for a minute. But no, it was great. It was just so fun to hear the whole story. I loved it, and it related so well to the trail map. I'm really happy.
Yay.
It was wonderful.
I know, Kay, you shared your email at the end, but for anyone who registered through us at Friends School and wants Kay's information and didn't get to take it down, I'm happy to help facilitate that. Right, Kay?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I love taking people on tours. So please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm always happy to set that up. Christine.
I'm wondering, as a parent of 2 Friends School alumni, whether this can be accessible to, like, my daughter, who's also a landscape designer, who might want to see this. I know you recorded it. Is that something that can be accessed by her? Because she couldn't come online today. Also, she wasn't invited. So I'm just wondering how that would work out. Because I mean, this whole thing is just so wonderful, and to hear the whole story, because I had heard part of it, and I've been involved with some of the plantings and some of the things that you've done, and I'm just in awe of how many gardens there are.
Yes, so we invite all, I'll answer this question, Kay. We invite all alumni, parents of alumni, and faculty and staff who we have information for to this session. And then I record them. So this is being recorded, and then it'll go, we put it up on our YouTube channel, and then that is shared out when it's ready in the alumni news that I send out every month to alumni and parents of alumni, and we'll also have it up on our website as well. So yes, it is recorded and shared afterwards. All
Thank
of the
you.
sessions are, yep.
Okay, thanks.
So I'm just gonna, can we go back to Francis? Francis, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm from Maryland originally. I'm currently a graduate student down at Kennesaw State University in Georgia. And I'm a bit of a bee expert, or at least working on it. If any of you have heard of Sam Droege, who runs the USGS Bee Inventory and Monitoring Lab over in Laurel, I worked under him for a while and fell in love with native bees and have been pursuing a career path to study them for a few years now. But
Francis is he's Billy Sweet Bill and Jerry Sweet's nephew, right? Yes. So he's a cousin of Friend School graduates.
Ah, hi, Francis.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm for a career, I'm really interested in getting into some sort of pollinator habitat management. I'm not sure exactly what job title I'll end up with that sort of a career, but I have been looking forward to talking with people like Kay and learning from her to try to orient myself and see how I can help to revitalize landscapes that maybe so desperately need that to support the biodiversity I'm so in love with. So.
Any other questions or comments before we depart for the day?
Well, I just want to say thank you everyone for listening, and thank you to the school for all these years of hard work together. I love it when people work together.
We're grateful for you, and welcome to the welcome to the Alumni Association in a month. You won't be seeing, this won't be the last you see of me, Kay.
That's great. All right. Well, everybody go outside and play. It's beautiful out there.
Before the rain comes this afternoon, get outside now in case we get more rain. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Kay, do you want to stay on for a second?
Sure. We'll do.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Wow.
Thanks for coming.